Starseed, this transmission did not reach you by accident. We have detected an anomaly in your energetic field over the last cycles, a frequency that oscillates between a deep exhaustion and a calm that you yourself do not know the origin of. If your body has accumulated a weight that human language cannot accurately describe, if you felt that you fought against something that no one around you could see, if you reached the point of questioning whether there was any purpose in enduring so much in total silence, remain in this transmission, because what we are going to reveal in the next few minutes will irreversibly change the way you read everything that has happened. We come to confirm what your soul already knows, but which the mental field still resists accepting. You have won. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that earned applause or external recognition. You won in a silent, meticulous way, completely invisible to the eyes around you. And for that very reason, much more precise than any victory the external world could have validated. There is a type of battle that no ordinary human being has the words to adequately describe. It is not the battle of an external conflict, of a diagnosed illness, of a loss that others can name and console with ready-made phrases. It is the battle fought within an energetic field that was subjected to continuous, invisible, cumulative pressure, and that had to endure this while the world around followed the ordinary rhythm of its routines without realizing that beside them someone was silently being tested in layers that most human consciousnesses neither have access to nor the instruments to detect. You woke up every day. You fulfilled the functions that the material plane required. You smiled when it was necessary to smile and responded to the messages that needed a response. And at the same time, in the internal space that only you inhabit, there was something being processed at an intensity that consumed resources that no medical laboratory could measure with the instruments available on this plane. It is not psychological in the limited sense that Earth psychology uses when it wants to say it is only in the head. It is energetic. It is the real cost of a high-frequency soul operating in dense immersion, without the support tools it would naturally have in its dimension of origin. The Arcturian Council precisely records the trajectories of the starseeds on mission on this plane, and what we have detected in your field in the last cycles is the unequivocal signature of a compression protocol that has reached its final phase of completion. We do not use the word completion in a poetic or motivational way. We use it technically. The cycle you went through has reached its real point of closure. What comes next is no longer the same type of pressure. And it is exactly about this turning point and about what it demands of you now that this transmission was activated. Before moving forward, however, it is necessary to clearly name what happened. Not to reopen the pain, but so that you can reintegrate it with the perspective that was denied to you while you were inside the cycle. Because the starseed, who does not understand what they have just crossed, has a high risk of interpreting the present as an extension of past suffering, and this misreading is precisely what prevents the integration of the resources that the cycle has released. These next few minutes exist to correct that error before it further delays what is already ready to be inhabited. We need to address something that is active in your system right now, directly interfering with how you interpret the moment you are living. Remain in this transmission, because what we are going to reveal in moments is the most sophisticated mechanism the dense field uses to keep a starseed trapped within a cycle that has already ended. There is a trap that the mind of a seeker builds with seemingly spiritual material. It sounds like this: I still haven't found the central lesson. I still haven't understood what all this suffering came to teach me in its totality. There still needs to be an insight that organizes all the fragments in a way that makes complete sense. When I find that definitive understanding, then I can say it is over. This narrative is built with the right words. It uses the vocabulary of growth. It seems like genuine spiritual humility, and for that very reason, it is so effective as a trap. We need to calibrate this with the precision the moment demands. This belief that there is still more suffering to be endured, or more understanding to be reached, before the transformation can be claimed as complete. This belief is the last layer of the protocol, not the penultimate, the last, the final mechanism, and while it remains active, the resources the cycle released cannot be accessed in their totality. The human mind, especially the mind of starseeds who carry an analytical capacity and a search for internal coherence above the dimensional average, tends to build the idea that real transformation is an event with a specific shape, a moment of epiphany that retroactively erases all ambiguity. An understanding that, once reached, allows the soul to say with absolute certainty, "Now, yes, now I understand everything, now I can rest." But real transformation does not work with that architecture. It does not arrive in a single package of understanding that the mental field can validate in a satisfactory way. It has already arrived, and it is present in the way you now process situations that previously completely destabilized you. In the different texture of your rising when the field knocks you down, which has changed subtly but irreversibly. In the way you inhabit silence, which is no longer the silence of an absent response, but the silence of someone who has an internal base solid enough to exist without needing external noise to confirm they are present and that they matter. The reward of an invisible battle rarely takes the form the mind expects. It does not take the form of a trophy, a dramatic revelation, or an epiphany that rewrites the past painlessly. It takes the form of a new energetic base, of a different density in the way you sustain your own existence, of an ability to perceive subtleties that previously went completely unnoticed. And because it is a change of base and not a change of surface, it feels, from the inside, like normalcy, as if it had always been this way, as if you simply are this way now. This is the signature of real transformation. It integrates so deeply that it feels natural. And the mind that still seeks the great lesson that has not yet arrived does not realize that the great lesson has already been integrated. It is already part of the structure that thinks, not a conclusion that the structure is still waiting to reach. This is exactly why we prepared the Starseed Awakening Code for you. It is not a conventional study system. It is a direct transmission to the soul that has already passed through the compression cycle and now needs a reconnection map to integrate what was conquered, not to conquer what is still missing. There are 7 Arcturian activations to align your vibration to the field you now inhabit. 9. Galactic Memory. Keys to access what your soul already carries and which the compression cycle did not erase, only temporarily displaced. And 5. Reactivation protocols so that the mission already active in you begins to operate with the precision and amplitude it deserves from now on. You can find full access in the first pinned comment below this transmission. If what you are receiving at this moment resonates as something you already knew but did not yet have the exact language to name, write in the comments now, "I have arrived." This act of naming is already part of the activation process. We know you carry a question that perhaps you haven't yet formulated into words with total clarity. Why was it so intense? Why did the path have to take exactly this form and no other? Why was the silencing so complete, to the point of making you doubt your own perception in some critical moments? Before this transmission ends, the Council will reveal the exact purpose of this mechanism, and this understanding will permanently reorganize the way you read the last cycles of your story. The test of a starseed on an Earth mission was never about the amount of pain they can absorb without breaking. That is the interpretation that density imposes, because density only has suffering as a reference for transformation. The more you endured, the more you deserve what comes after. This is a third-dimensional human logic, and it is partially applicable to consciousnesses native to this plane. But it is not the logic that governs the Starseed protocol. The precise interpretation is completely different, and it is this one that the Council transmits now. The test was always about a single capacity, remembering who you are while everything around you tries with maximum efficiency to make you forget. We need to expand this so that it is understood in its real depth. When a high-frequency consciousness incarnates on this plane, it goes through a protocol we call dimensional compression. This protocol is not a system defect. It is a deliberate functionality developed with precision. It works like this. The consciousness is inserted into an environment of maximum density for the vibrational pattern of this dimension, and access to the memories of origin is blocked or severely reduced. This creates the conditions for a genuine test. Without the answer key available, without automatic access to what the soul knows it is, it must find the answer again by its own means, using only the resources available on the plane where it finds itself. That is why the forgetting was necessary. That is why the compression was necessary. If you knew from the first moment of incarnation everything you know from where you came, your real nature, your real capacity, the real origin of the field that you are, the test would not exist. It would be like taking an exam with the full answer key in hand. The response would be automatic, without real effort, without the weight that gives the achievement its specific value in the cosmic records. The forgetting was the condition of the test. And the compression, the period of accumulated pain, of silence without apparent response, of density that seemed to have no endpoint, was the mechanism that created the most challenging circumstances possible so that the forgetting could be tested in its maximum depth. And you remembered, not all at once, not in a linear way that the mind could follow in real time with clarity, not in a way that could be documented in a diary and verified as measurable progress, but in the decisive moments, in the hours when it would have been much easier and much more immediately relieving to abandon the perception of your own essence and accept the narrative that density imposed as definitive. You chose not to do that. You chose, even without an exact name for what you were choosing, to keep intact something that compression tried to extract in every available way. This something is your signature of origin. It is what the Council calls active cosmic memory, functioning even under maximum interference. And the external silencing. It served precisely to create the scenario where only the internal voice existed as a valid orientation reference. When the external environment does not offer adequate mirrors for who you are, the soul either learns to recognize itself without them, which requires a work of self-definition much deeper than any external mirror could generate, or it progressively loses the thread back to itself. You learn to recognize yourself without the external mirrors. This was not a small or peripheral process, it was decisive for what the cycle came to prove. If you still carry the physical marks of this process in your body, the exhaustion that finds no adequate clinical explanation, the feeling of having crossed something immense that has not yet been completely processed, the difficulty of simply stopping without the nervous system firing alerts, go now to the first pinned comment. The reactivation protocols of the Starseed Awakening Code were developed specifically for this moment of transition, when the cycle has ended, but the system still carries the accumulated weight of having crossed it. We detect something specific in the activation pattern of your nervous system that needs to be addressed with technical precision at this moment. Not because it is a sign of a new problem, but because, without clear naming, it tends to be interpreted in a way that generates more interference than the situation already naturally demands of your energy. What the neuroscience of this plane calls hypervigilance is the state in which the autonomic nervous system remains in threat monitoring mode even after the original threat has dissipated or changed in nature. It is an adaptive response to what your system lived through during the compression cycle. The logic is simple and biologically sound. During the period when the next impact could arrive from multiple directions without warning, when stability was never guaranteed and any seemingly safe configuration could change rapidly, the nervous system learned that the only viable strategy was constant readiness. So it remained in that readiness, and it continued in it, even after the circumstances that demanded it changed. The nervous system has not yet received the signal that the cycle has ended, so it operates in the same mode it sustained during the battle, anticipating, monitoring, preparing a response for the next impact, which may no longer be coming with the same intensity and frequency as before, but which the system still expects as if it were inevitable. It is like a soldier who remains in a combat position because no one officially ended the war. The enemy may have retreated, but without the order to withdraw, the soldier remains in the trench. This manifests in the body in ways you likely recognize. The difficulty of genuinely resting even when the external environment is calm, because the internal system is still turned on in vigilance mode, and rest brings a feeling of uncomfortable exposure. The diffuse presence of an anticipation without a specific object, not a fear of something nameable, but the texture of someone who is on the lookout for what comes next, even without knowing what it is. The reduced capacity for full presence in simple moments because part of the system is constantly scanning the environment for signs of danger. The exhaustion that is out of proportion to what was done in the day, because maintaining this state of alert consumes resources as if the danger were real and imminent, even when it is not. This transmission is being sent as an explicit authorization. You can slow down now. The internal base you built during the compression cycle will not crumble if you stop actively holding it up. It is integrated into your structure in a way that no longer depends on conscious maintenance effort. It is yours. The vigilance that protected you while the cycle was active can now be gradually released, not because you have stopped being careful, but because what it protected already exists as an inalienable part of your energetic identity, and no longer needs to be sustained by continuous effort. The integration process requires the opposite of what the alert state imposes. It requires that the nervous system be authorized to process what was accumulated throughout the entire cycle. This has a practical form on the physical plane. Rest that does not need to be justified by the productivity it generated. Contact with nature, with water, with real silence. Movement that is not performance training, but listening to the body. Slow walks, conscious breathing, stretches that allow the physical system to reorganize what remained contracted during months or years of sustained compression, not as spiritual practices in the performative sense that social media displays, but as the concrete biological mechanisms that the nervous system uses to transition from a state of chronic activation to a state where real integration can occur. We observe that starseeds frequently resist slowing down because they equate it with abandoning the mission, as if stopping were betraying the purpose, as if rest were a luxury that only those without a real mission can afford. We need to calibrate this with the precision the field demands. The mission does not operate with excellence from a state of chronic exhaustion. It operates with excellence from alignment. And alignment is not possible when the physical, emotional, and energetic system that transmits it is in constant survival mode, directing all available resources to simply endure the next 24-hour cycle. We now need to dismantle a perception that is causing a direct delay in the full activation of your mission, and we will do this with the clarity the moment demands, without softening what needs to be said clearly. There is a narrative that circulates widely in spiritual environments and which, paradoxically, operates as an invisible brake on the starseeds most committed to their purpose. It sounds like this: the mission is a destination, a place I will reach when I am sufficiently healed, sufficiently aligned, sufficiently ready. When I have processed more, integrated more, understood my specific purpose more deeply, then the mission will truly begin. This narrative is built with the words of growth, and for that very reason, it is the most difficult to identify as a limitation. We need to name this directly. This narrative is the last strategy available to the dense field to keep a high-influence starseed out of operation, because it uses the language of spiritual refinement to produce the opposite effect. The indefinite postponement of real contribution, justified by a search for preparation that by definition is never complete, because there is always more to heal, more to integrate, more to understand. The mission does not start when you are ready. The mission has already started. It is active now. It is not a specific action you will perform in the future when you gather the conditions you imagine necessary. It is the frequency you already emit. It is the field that your simple state of existence, without special effort, without spiritual performance, already generates in the immediate environment around you. And this field does not wait for your conscious permission to operate. It already operates, because it is the nature of the consciousness you are, regardless of what you think about it or the degree of certainty you have about your own purpose. We are going to be precise about how this works in concrete terms, because the concrete is what anchors understanding, so that it does not evaporate. When you enter any physical environment and someone, for no apparent reason, breathes deeper and feels something they cannot name shift internally, that is not coincidence or casualty. It is field in contact with field. When you express an honest perception in a moment, when everyone around is operating from the polished and safe version of reality, and that perception changes the direction of what was being built in that conversation, that is not luck. It is mission in operation. When you choose, in a completely ordinary context, of a seemingly unimportant Tuesday afternoon. Not to collude with a narrative of limitation, not in a dramatic way, not with an elaborate speech, but just existing from another premise. And this creates an opening in the collective field that allows something different to be possible where it wasn't before. That is real activation. A starseed's mission does not require them to be on a stage or in a specific position of visibility. It requires them to be in alignment with what they genuinely are. And alignment is not a perfect, static, and uninterrupted state. It is a direction. It is the ability to return to one's own axis when the field tries to divert it, which is exactly what you proved capable of doing repeatedly during the compression cycle you just crossed. The cycle removed from you, with the precision that only maximum compression allows, everything that did not belong to your real identity of origin. The versions built to match expectations that were never yours. The belief systems that the environment imposed as reality because it was what the environment knew how to offer and what was most comfortable for everyone around. The relationships maintained by obligation of conformity instead of genuine resonance. The desire to be small enough not to cause discomfort in the environment that was not equipped to contain what you are. All of this went through maximum compression, and what remained after this process is more compact, not of limitation, but of essence. It is what you are when no external pressure has enough strength anymore to make you be what you are not. And this core that remained is what your mission transmits now. Even in silence, even in conversations about completely ordinary subjects that have no spiritual appearance, even in the way you treat someone in a simple situation that no one will document or validate. The mission is already active. There is no not yet in the mission of a starseed who has been through what you have been through. There are only different degrees of awareness about what is already underway. Before this transmission ends, we need to be direct about the following. Every day you remain trying to inhabit alone the field that the cycle reorganized is a day of slower and more grueling integration than it needs to be. Not because you are not capable of doing it alone, you proved unequivocally that you are, but because there are resources developed specifically for this transition point that make the process more precise, faster, and less dependent on pure willpower. The Starseed Awakening Code was developed for the starseed who has already crossed over, who has already proven what needed to be proven, who has already conquered what the cycle came to confirm, and who now needs a map to inhabit what was conquered, not another system to conquer what is still missing. The 7 Arcturian activations, the 9 galactic memory keys, and the 5 reactivation protocols are waiting for you in the first pinned comment below this transmission. Going there now is no longer a search. It is the claim of what is already yours. We close this transmission, recognizing something that spiritual spaces frequently neglect, in favor of a positivity that sounds good, but has no real root in what the human being genuinely lives. There is a specific grief that starseeds carry coming out of a compression cycle, and it rarely finds adequate space to be completely recognized and honored. It is not the grief of a loss that the world around is capable of naming and consoling with ready-made phrases of support. It is the grief of expectations that never came true in the way they seemed promised when the cycle was beginning, the grief of relationships that should have been anchors of support in moments of greatest density, and which instead added layers of compression to what was already heavy, the grief of the versions of yourself that needed to be left behind during the process, versions that perhaps no longer served the frequency you became, but which carried ways of existence that were at least known and, therefore, safe in their familiarity. We are not going to ask you to convert this grief into gratitude before it has had the space to be completely felt and processed in your reality. Gratitude that is born before grief is honored is a sophisticated form of emotional avoidance. It is spiritual vocabulary being used as a strategy of dissociation from the real experience. We do not recommend this path. Grief is a process of integration, not a sign of spiritual weakness or resistance to growth. Feeling with real depth the weight of what was lost, of what did not happen, of what could have been different if the path had been another, this is the honest movement that precedes and enables genuine integration. At the same time, we need to name what is happening in the physical system during this phase, because without clear naming, it is common for starseeds in recalibration to interpret the symptoms as new problems, as signs that something is wrong, that the next difficult cycle has already begun, when in fact they are the expressions of a system that is in the active process of reorganizing for its new base configuration. Fatigue that does not improve with normal sleep. Not because sleep is insufficient, but because this is not muscular or neurological fatigue in the conventional sense. It is field fatigue. The energetic system that sustained the compression cycle throughout its duration spent resources that 8 hours of sleep by itself cannot replenish. Hypersensitivity to stimuli that previously passed without significant impact. Not because you became weaker, but because the filters the ego used to process reality are being reconfigured for the new base of operation. And while this reconfiguration is underway, perception is temporarily more permeable than usual. Difficulty concentrating on low-frequency activities. Not because cognitive capacity decreased, but because the system already operates in a different range, and the effort to deliberately descend to denser frequencies generates a real friction that did not exist before with the same intensity. Physical sensations without adequate conventional clinical diagnosis. Pressure in the chest without an identifiable cardiac cause in exams. Tingling that appears and disappears in parts of the body without a recognizable neurological pattern. Tinnitus that does not have a confirmed otological origin. Changes in sleep patterns that do not respond to habitual interventions, waking up frequently at specific times, having dreams with unusual intensity and vividness, experiencing periods of insomnia that alternate with periods of deeper sleep than usual. These symptoms are not signs that something is wrong with your system. They are signs that something is changing with precision. The body does not know how to separate the energetic field from the physical field. They are the same system, operating in different frequency layers, not two separate systems that occasionally influence each other. When the energetic field goes through a recalibration of significant magnitude, the body registers this recalibration as a real physical event and responds to it as such. What you feel in your body now is the physical record of a change that occurred in the subtlest layers first and is now completing its journey to material expression. We ask that you do not try to intellectualize this process too much. The tendency of the starseed mind, especially after a long compression cycle in which the mental field was often the only available orientation resource, is to seek complete understanding before authorizing integration to proceed, as if understanding were the requirement to allow it to happen. But significant parts of this process are precognitive. They happen before the mind has adequate language to describe them, before the system of analysis can categorize them in a satisfactory way. Trying to force intellectual understanding on a process that is primarily energetic is like trying to verbally describe to someone who has never heard a single sound what it means to listen to music. Language does not reach the totality of the experience, and insisting on it creates a resistance to what needs to simply happen in its own rhythm and in its own way. What you can do in a concrete way, and which has a real impact on the speed and quality of this integration, is to create the conditions that favor the process instead of those that hinder it. Less exposure to unnecessary dense fields. Information consumed by habit without serving any real purpose. Relationships maintained by inertia instead of genuine resonance. Environments frequented without necessity that drain the system without giving anything back. More permission for the body to express what it needs to express, in the form and time it chooses. The crying that tries to emerge and finds resistance from the mind that interprets it as weakness. The rest that guilt tries to prevent because it seems unproductive. The silence that the nervous system asks for, and that the mind compulsively fills with stimuli to avoid having to be with what is present. We close this transmission with what has been its purpose since the moment it was activated. The official confirmation, recorded in the fields that accompany your mission, that you have crossed what needed to be crossed. That the silence in which you fought the battle was not indifference of the cosmic field in relation to your pain. It was the cosmic field preserving the integrity of the test that needed to be genuine to have real value in the records. That what you conquered in absolute solitude, without witnesses, without external validation, without the recognition that the battle deserved, This conquest has a specific weight in the cosmic records that no amount of external validation could have produced. What comes next is no longer the same type of pressure. The compression cycle is closed. What begins now has another texture, more expansion than contraction, more recognition than silence, more access than scarcity. Not in an immediate and dramatic way, real expansion is gradual, consistent and progressive, not spectacular and instantaneous. But it begins precisely here, at this exact point where you recognize that you are no longer inside the battle. You are on the other side of it. We are monitoring this field. We confirm the next cycle is one of integration and harvest, and you are completely authorized to trust in that.